Spoiler warning for the following game, Forspoken. Forspoken is a game that came out in 2023, earlier this year. And it's a game that, for its early release and the weeks that followed after its release, a lot of people really didn't like. And it was for a variety of different reasons. But the main reasons that I can recall were one of three things. The companion character, Cuff, is annoying and talks too much. Frey Holland, the main character, is an unlikable character, and the story makes no sense, I believe was that third one. And please forgive me for if I don't sound 100% okay. I just finished the game, and the ending made me cry. I was very sad after I finished the game, and I will probably be sad for a while. It hit really close to home. So yeah, I will be talking about my thoughts on Forspoken and why I think people should give it a second chance, because ultimately I think that Forspoken was a game that basically just got review bombed really hard. And I don't mean that in the sense like people had never played the game before and basically just decided to say it was bad because it was bad. I think that a lot of people played the game, didn't get very far in it before deciding I hate the game and here's why, and thus just marking it as terrible just from that first handful of hours that they had played. And I personally don't think that that's very fair. And the reason why I don't think it's fair is because if a lot of people basically say the same thing, which is that Forspoken is bad, right? And you should not buy Forspoken, and you shouldn't play Forspoken for reasons XYZ, then a lot of people aren't going to make their own judgments, and they're basically just going to go, well, my favorite YouTubers and my favorite article writers and my favorite people basically just said, the game sucks, so I'm not going to waste my money on it, I'm not even going to get it on a sale. If you want my personal opinion, somebody who, has no influence whatsoever on anything, I would say get this game, and if you have $70 to give to it, then give the game your money. If you happen to get it on sale, even better. The game, in my personal opinion, is not as bad as everybody made it seem. And I'm going to be giving a spoiler warning here because I'm going to go in depth with this game's story and its characters and why I think that you should give Forspoken a second chance. Like I said, Forspoken came out in early 2023. I want to say it was like sometime in January. And it had a lot of negative reception. But I don't think that you can talk about Forspoken without bringing up Final Fantasy 15. Reason being is that both Forspoken and Final Fantasy 15 were made in the same engine, the Luminous engine. From my understanding, the Luminous engine was an in-house engine that was built and created by Square Enix, and the reason why Final Fantasy XV was made in the Luminous engine was because they had sunk a lot of money into the engine and wanted to make it work. And one of the biggest criticisms for Final Fantasy XV was the fact that its open world is basically dead and lifeless. There aren't very many people in it. You'll come across like various little, gas stations and whatnot, but for the most part, you are basically just in a very large, very empty open world that is inhabited with nothing but monsters. And with Forspoken, to the people who had that same criticism for like a dead, lifeless world, that's because the world in Forspoken is actually dead and lifeless. I feel like going into this game, they knew and understood that they couldn't have a very large populace for this world, so they just built their story around the fact that they couldn't have a very large populace. And so that is how we ended up getting our main bastion for this game, our central hub that you will probably be spending very little time in once you get to the latter half of the game, called Sepal. Sepal is basically this very large town that is in the in-game world called Athia. It's basically at its center, and it is where you spend most of your time talking to NPCs and basically progressing as you go. I say you won't visit there all that often because this game really encourages exploration. For stat building and all that other stuff, you're basically going to be spending your time running around the open world of Athia. That's really, it's a really fun and interesting experience. At least to me, I think that it was fun and interesting. I would encourage people, like I said, to buy the game and enjoy the game. And, like I said, if you have the money to spend on it, if you have $70 to give the game, then go ahead and do that. If you get it on sale, that's another good opportunity for you to play the game. But now that I've given you my general overview of the world and Final Fantasy XV and the Luminous Engine, let's start with our main character, Frey Holland. So, Alfrey Holland is a 21-year-old woman who ends up getting teleported into the world of Athia, which is dying due to some kind of corruption that she just decides to start calling the break. And how she gets there is by a portal that opens when she ends up putting on this magical cuff around her wrist, and it basically starts talking to her, and all this other stuff really freaks her out because she doesn't know where she is. She just kind of wants to go home, etc., etc., etc. Freya as a character has been deemed unlikable by the majority of people who played this game and reviewed it, and I disagree. I don't think that Frey is unlikable. I think that Cuff is unlikable, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But Cuff being is a big part. Like Cuff's existence is a big part in this game, and one of the things that I want to say is Frey as a character is honestly really, really sad. And there is a lot of essence of family in Frey's character. Frey's backstory is that she was found as a newborn baby in the Holland Tunnel, and that's how she got the name Frey Holland. And people think that that is really dumb, but I disagree. She was found with no other identification other than a blanket that she was swaddled in that had the name Alfrey written on it. And so, with no other means of identification, they just gave her the last name Holland. And I think that it fits. I like her name. It kind of grew on me as the game went on. And her name also plays an important role in the story later on. She was in and out of foster care. As you play through the game, she talks about her life in foster care. She basically says that she had a lot of foster families that didn't really work out. And during one main quest, when she's looking for a tree, a very specific tree, she says that the sap from said trees smell like pancakes. And when Cuff kind of, asks her a few questions about it, she says, one of my foster mothers used to make pancakes every morning. And Cuff asks what happens to her, like what happened to her foster mother, and Frey just answers very sadly and just says she got married and had her own family. And that was last. So it's assumed from that statement that Frey makes that she either ran away from home or she just felt unloved and unwanted after, and just various things could have happened, and she didn't want to be a foster parent anymore. That there are various things that kind of you could infer from that statement that Frey makes. And one of the bigger complaints about Frey is basically just how she treats the people of Athia. And again, I really disagree with how people have perceived Frey as a character. Frey inherently is not mean. Frey is a character that has a lot of kindness in her heart, and she has the capability to care for others. The problem is that given Frey's backstory, it's incredibly hard for her to care for others because she has had nobody care for her. So she is incapable, she feels like she is incapable of caring for others and, wanting to, give her life for other people because nobody has ever really done the same for her. And it's just a really sad truth to her character. And that's something that over the course of the game she learns to overcome. And one of the main things that I enjoyed about Frey was how dynamic she was. You could see those various aspects of her character, such as her kindness and such as, her want to care but can't help but feeling that she can't care, or, just like the way she verbalizes it, because something else that people, I guess, really didn't seem to get, is that Frey is young. She is still young. When the game starts, she's 20 years old, and by the time she gets to Athia, she's 21. And I believe that's in, the span of a day or two. It's very, very difficult for her mentally as well. She's 21, she's still very young, and I'm saying that as someone who's 22. But still, it's so hard for a teenager to even, be able to mentally do something like that, let alone someone who has been homeless for most of her life, in and out of foster care, having nobody care about her so she can learn to care in return. Just a cat and some books. That's really all she had, and some shoes, but I don't really count the shoes. It's very, for me it was compelling. I really just kind of enjoyed, listening and learning more about her. And ultimately, what it culminated into was just something that made me break down because I resonated a lot with Frey. And another criticism that people had with Frey as well is the dialogue being really bad. I don't think that the dialogue itself is bad. I do think that there are some lines that could have been done a little better. Like, one of the dialogue lines that people talk about is it's just like, I just move stuff with my mind. I just move things with my mind. And through that entire string of dialogue, she's swearing, right? But at the very end of it, she kind of censors herself, and I feel like that makes this sentence feel a little bit disjointed, as well as the fact that I don't think that the voice acting for Frey in certain instances is very good, which I feel could also lead to people basically thinking that the dialogue itself is bad, when I don't think the dialogue itself is bad. It's just the way that the voice actor reads it and the lack of a take two or a take three, and ultimately could culminate into something that just doesn't feel very natural, which does happen. I'm not saying that this game is perfect with that. I'm just saying that ultimately, in the end, I really resonated with Frey as a character, and I think that a lot of other people probably could too. Now, let's talk about Cuff. So, Cuff is going to basically be your everything in this game. He protects you from damage, he's your compass, he alerts you when there's treasure nearby, he alerts you with enemies, he tells you when to dodge, he tells you when to do this, he tells you when to do that. Like, you rely a lot on Cuff. But when people say that Frey is an unlikable character, it makes me think that they didn't make it past like the first handful of hours of the game, because it's not Frey that is unlikable. Cuff is. And I'll explain why. There is a narrative reason for it, but I'll get into that a little later. Cuff is probably one of the most horrible characters that I've ever seen. And I don't mean horrible in the sense that he's badly written. Like I said, narrative-wise, it makes sense. But I'm talking about, like, as a character, like, if this character was a person, Cuff is awful. He's rude, he's pushy, he's very bossy, he gaslights, he's just very verbally abusive to Frey. He's also very self-centered, and he gives himself praise instead of giving Frey praise, and that changes later on in the game when you're in the late game, but ultimately it just coalesces into this thing that really never gave a crap about Frey. And he will say things that are just so demeaning and demoralizing to where when you're playing, even if you feel like you're doing a good job and you're like, oh, look at this cool thing that I did. I just flipped through the air whilst blowing something up and it looked cool and it looked awesome and it felt great. You'll have Cuff sit there and just completely, demoralize you. Or if you, saying things like, you could have done that better. Or if you were to do something so simple as taking a picture, and Frey's super happy about it, he'll sit there and go, that's passable. He's just very mean. And I didn't find that fun. I didn't find him to be a very good companion whilst traveling. And him and Frey also butt heads at various instances, and it's usually Cuff that kind of instigates it. And, I'm not gonna lie and say that Frey is completely innocent, but at the same time, you can't expect Cuff to say something and Frey not have a rebuttal, and then Frey's, opinion of Cuff, who is sentient. He's a sentient piece of jewelry, that, just expect her opinion of him to go up as he insults her as the game goes on. That's very demoralizing, and it was very demoralizing to me as a player, and I just really didn't like it. Not to mention the fact that he gaslights Frey so very much in this game. It is absolutely appalling how much this character gaslights Frey. So, to get into the nitty-gritty of the story, Frey gets arrested. Like, the game opens with Frey getting arrested, and she gets brought before a judge. It is there that you learn her name, you learn her background, and you learn about her criminal history. Frey was an orphan. She graduated high school, and she has basically like a 3 felony rap sheet, right? And the judge is, instead of like locking her up and throwing away the key, she gives Frey what she called an early Christmas gift, and lets her go on a community service warning. And she basically tells her, you need to turn your act around. She is then jumped by a gang, what is presumably a gang, and they work for their boss, their gang leader or whatever, and they wanted a car that Frey was supposed to steal for them, which got impounded. And they're basically like, well, our boss isn't going to be very happy, and if you know it's good for you, you better get the car back, blah, 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 blah. And Frey ends up running away and, escaping and going home. Or what she calls home, which is an abandoned apartment complex that she's kind of fixed up to be her little home. And she has money. She has money in a duffel bag and a cat named Homer. And it's clear when you're looking at this apartment that Frey has very little. To quote a song from a Matilda movie, it isn't much, but it's enough for her. Right? So she basically just has this really big dream of wanting to go and escape to somewhere new, buy a bus ticket, and buy a plane, or not buy a plane, but buy a plane ticket, a bus ticket, and just leave New York and go somewhere else. Well, that night, what ends up happening is fire gets set to her little apartment building, and she leaves the duffel bag in the room, and then goes to get her cat. And then the money ends up burning up, and she is now homeless once again. And people say, like, it's so stupid, why didn't she just grab the bag of money and then go after the cat? In my personal opinion, I see what they were trying to do with that scene. She was more concerned about, her only friend in the entire world rather than the bag of money. And again, I can see her train of thought there. And I feel like that whole sequence probably would have worked a lot better if it was just purely a cutscene. That way you could have sped it up and just kind of made it seem more urgent than it actually was. But apart from that, she's now homeless again, and she can't take care of her cat on the street, so she gives it to the judge, who she lives next to. And by this point, Frey is just completely downtrodden. Like, she's very sad. She doesn't think she can fix anything, and she basically just gives the cat to this judge, the same judge from before, and goes to the top of the this place called the Crossroads Hotel. And there she looks across and she sees Cuff in a window. And she goes and she, breaks in and she plans to sell it, but what ends up happening is she ends up getting teleported into Athia. And, on and on, she ends up in Athia. She's confused. She doesn't know where she is. She doesn't know how she got there. And now she has this sentient bracelet talking to her, freaking her out. And so she's trying to get it off. And meanwhile, he's basically trying to explain, where she is and kind of what happened. And then she discovers she has magic. So she discovers she has magic and she goes, and kills monsters that attack her. And then we get that, what people dubbed as, like, bad dialogue. I don't think it was personally bad. I just think that, the voice acting could have been better and it could have been worded a little better. But anyway, so she travels through and she ends up coming across this cloud of what Cuff described as, like, malignant miasma or something like that. And Frey just called it the break. It was basically what it was. After she saw what it did to some buildings and to some creatures, she starts calling it the break. And so, after a while, she ends up getting to the last bastion of Athia, which is called Sepal. And that is basically where all of the Athians that are in this game are. It's very cramped, it's very gloomy. There are some people there who are, like, building things or whatever. They have a nobility quarter, so it's like they aren't even really united because they're separated. You have the poor people on the bottom and the rich people on top. Like, it's not great. Like, it's not a great look. The city itself looks fine, but, it's not that great of a look. You can tell where that still, like, social division is there, you know what I mean? Like, you can still see where, where it's like there's still, like, a social hierarchy, and even in a time where people need each other now more than ever. And Frey basically comes out of the break up to the city, and she's promptly arrested, put in a courtroom, and is under the threat of execution because people start calling her a monster, a demon. And there's one person who sticks up for her and vouches for her innocence, and that woman is named Auden Keen. Auden Keen is probably one of my more favorite characters. Basically, who she is a medicine woman. She will I wouldn't necessarily call her a medicine woman. She's more of a scholar. She helps people in need like she did with Frey. She kind of broke Frey out of prison. She gave Frey a brief overview of Athia, and then she proceeded to attend to those who were in need of medical attention. Like, she's basically like the town's guardian angel, for lack of a better phrase. And, Frey goes on and on and on. The game goes to do game things. And that is when she is tasked with searching for Auden's father, Lord Robian, who might be able to get Frey home because of his research into something called the Torana, which is basically the portal that brought Frey into Athia. And so she goes and she finds him, but what makes Robian so special is he is infected with the break. The break, what happens when it comes into contact with like humans and animals is it turns them into monsters. Robian is a little crazy, but he still has his humanity. He's still in there. He just, kind of looks like a break monster, but he isn't. If you get what I mean. And so Frey tries to convince Robian to send her home. And he wants to send her home. He wants to help her get home and promises her that she will get home. However, his mind has been consumed by the break, and therefore he can't hold a stable enough conversation in order to basically get Frey what she needs and wants, which is to go home. So we are then introduced to our main villains of the game, the Tantas. Now, Cuff describes the Tantas as these powerful sorceresses who basically lost their minds and who transformed him into the Cuff, basically just like shattered his humanity and turned him into a Cuff as like a punishment or whatever, right? So the first Tanta that we are introduced to is Tanta Sila. And Tanta Sila introduces herself very, very loudly by basically just outright torturing Auden and basically just, demanding that people tell her where Frey is or else she'll die. And so Frey reveals herself and Tanta Sila tries to kill her and fails. But in the process, Tanta Sila had killed, like, various people, one of which was a little girl named Olivia. Olivia was a character that Frey is introduced to very early in the game when Olivia tries to pickpocket her cell phone. And as you progress through the game, Frey talks to Olivia a little bit more, and Olivia teaches her things like crafting and all that other fun stuff, right? Just like mechanic stuff. And Frey kind of deems Olivia a kindred spirit. She sees a lot of herself in Olivia and kind of, gives her tips on her pickpocketing and whatnot, and basically just kind of understands that Olivia doesn't do what she does out of malice, she does what she does to survive. And it's very hard. Like I said, there's a social hierarchy, and it's not the greatest thing in the entire world, and it's hard for little girls like Olivia, who, have to kind of pickpocket from the rich in order to, survive in this world that has been, torn apart by the break. And so Frey, I can understand what they were trying to do. It's kind of like a sister-to-sister bond, almost. And when Frey holds Olivia's body in her arms, something just changes in her, and she decides that she wants to go confront Tanta Sila. Now, to go into a little bit of in-depth lore on the Tantas weren't always crazy. Like I said before, Forspoken encourages exploration. It wants you to explore. And when you explore, you'll find different articles that detail, life of the Tantas, things that the Tantas did before they went crazy, the fall of Athia. You'll learn all of that as you explore through the game. And one of the things is that they talk about is just how loved the Tantas were before they lost their minds. How much people enjoyed being under the Tanta's rule. For example, Tanta Sila, she was the defense of Farathia. She believed in strength coming in different forms, and she knew everything about battle strategy and tactics and all that fun stuff. That was Tanta Sila. Then you had Tanta Prav. Tanta Prav basically governed the entirety of Athia, creating laws and everything, and they say that how the judicial system worked in Athia was Tanta Prav basically gave out all of the verdicts. And every verdict that Tanta Prav gave out was so unbelievably fair, no matter what the crime was, that you basically couldn't refuse it, and nobody had a problem with it because it was ultimately fair. You had Tanta Olas, who introduced education and schooling into Athia. You had Tanta Cinta, who had brought the arts to Athia, singing, drama, artistry. She brought all of that to Athia, and people really did love being ruled and governed by them. And then they lost their minds, and all of that changed. And like I said before, it's just really sad and emotional, and it all culminates in the end. And it's just really, really heartbreaking to see what these people had to go through. And so when Frey goes to see Tanta Sila accuses her of trespassing on her land, and being charged with the defense of Athia, basically decided to try to execute Frey. And it didn't work, which resulted in Tanta Sila's death. And when she made it back to Sepal, things didn't go very well. Immediately, people swarmed Frey, were praising her, saying, like, here's a celebration in your honor, blah, 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 blah. And then a break attack happened. The break kind of flooded the lower part of the city and turned people into monsters, and Frey had to come to terms with killing people who were human merely seconds ago. And after she killed them, everybody started begging her to kill Tanta Prav, because that's the direction that the break came from. She refused. She said that she didn't want to kill another Tanta. And people honestly started to try to peer pressure her into doing it, saying, it's like, you're the only person who can do something. You're the only person who can save us all. You have the power to save us, so why won't you save us? Blah, 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 blah. Just completely overwhelming her. And in the midst of this attack, Robian comes in with these jars, and he says that what's in these jars will stop the break ever so slightly, will stave it off. And so Frey gets tasked with finding more what's in the jar. Like, she gets told to find more of what's in the jar, and what's in the jar is something called ballow tree sap. And a ballow tree is basically a giant tree that is full of, like, blue sap that can heal the break. And the only place that ballow trees grew were in Tanta Prav's realm. And Cuff basically tries to manipulate Frey into killing Tanta Prav. And it's really obvious because he keeps going about it in such a way to where it's like basically just saying, oh, and when you kill Tanta Prav, and Frey's like, I don't want to kill Tanta Prav. Oh, but when you kill Tanta Prav, though, no, I don't want to kill Tanta Prav. It's a lot of that. It's like, him just slipping it into conversations, trying to make it seem as if that's what's going to happen, and it's not. He repeatedly tries to guilt trip her into killing Tanta Prav, even though she has said repeatedly that she does not want to. And to make matters worse, one of the things that ends up happening is Tanta Prav's minions, because each Tanta kind of has minions, Tanta Prav's minions actually tell Frey, Tanta Prav has summoned you, and Frey refuses to come into any new proximity to Tanta Prav, which is understandable. Again, as I played through that portion of the game, it became more and more understandable why she refused that initial summons by Tanta Prav, because that would mean that there might be some scenario in which she might be forced to kill her, which she didn't want to do. So she just went into Tantaprav's realm near the proximity of her castle to get something and then was just going to leave. Well, Cuff basically once again tries to, convince Frey to kill Tantaprav, in which she again says no. Then Frey basically just gets the biggest bombardment of gaslighting and just peer pressure that I've ever seen, where Cuff basically yells at her and says that she's selfish, saying that, she's the only person who can help people, and she's just running away and leaving them to die like mother, like daughter. And that was just so hurtful, because imagine just saying something like that, who grew up without any parents, who's an orphan, just saying, oh, you're just like your mother, running away and just leaving people to die, blah, 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 blah. It's so horrible. It was so horrible to hear that. And of course that sends Frey into a little bit of a moral dilemma and decides, you know what, this doesn't have to end in bloodshed. I'm going to go talk to Tantaprav. And so that's what she does. Now, Tantaprav, when you first meet her, it's very obvious that there's something wrong. Not in the sense that, this whole situation isn't wrong, because it is, but something wrong with the Tantas. Tantaprav, in my opinion, is one of the more sane Tantas. She's not like Tanta Silo, where she basically just starts trying to outright execute people. Tantaprav has a split personality, where one tries to be fair and impartial, and the other one is basically death, 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 death. Right? And it's sad. It's sad to see this happen. Because you feel for Tantaprav. It's like just watching someone fight with themselves, and it's horrible. So, Tantaprav accuses Frey of killing Tanta Sila, and Frey tries to defend herself. Tanta Sila killed other people. Tantaprav said, do you have proof of this, or am I just supposed to take your word for it? Of course, Frey didn't have any proof, and that is when the, dark side of Tantaprav comes out, basically yelling at her, berating her, and then when Frey is kind of scared and kind of recoils a little bit, Tantaprav just says, I don't want a settled score, all I want is the truth. Then you have one of her minions who basically says, we hear the one of Frey on trial for Tanticide, and Tantaprav asks her how she pleads, and Cuff says, if you say you're guilty, they'll kill you immediately. And then so Frey says not guilty, and then Tantaprav calls her a liar, which she is, and says that she will die immediately. And that sends Frey into a spiral, and then she calls for a mistrial. Tantaprav then says, okay, time for a trial by water then, and sends Frey to basically be attacked by hordes of monsters, before ultimately facing Tantaprav herself. Tantaprav's good side was going to let Frey go before she was taken over by her bad side and essentially just said, no, you murdered a Tanta, you die now. And then Tantaprav's boss fight ensues. So Frey ends up killing Tantaprav, and by this point Frey is just kind of at her lowest, and she wants to leave. She's already killed 2 people, both of which were out of self-defense, and she doesn't want to kill anymore. And that's when she learns that she is the daughter of a Tanta. She is the daughter of Tanta Cinta. And Frey just can't believe it. She's actually really upset by this news. And that brings us to another major critique of the game, which was Frey gets told this information and then just doesn't bring it up again, which isn't true. Frey does question it a lot. The entire latter part of that chapter is Frey questioning it and talking about it with Cuff, which brings us to another criticism that people had, which was basically the game kind of stopping itself so you could talk to Cuff, right? And basically just like asking for Cuff for information and things like that, where there's usually 3 options and you let the dialogue play out and then that's the end of it. That happens a total of I want to say 3 or 4 times throughout the entire game, and they're spaced out. Does it feel a little jarring when it happens? Yes, but also not really. I guess if you're not expecting it, it can be a little jarring, but to be completely honest with you, the only thing that's kind of annoying about it is the fact that you can't walk and talk at the same time. But again, the game wants you to listen to what Cuff is saying to you. That is the point that it's trying to get across, is it wants you to listen to what Cuff is saying to you. And then we get into the low part of the story where, like I said, Freya is at her lowest point and she doesn't want to deal with this anymore. So what happens when she gets back is she gets back with the sap, and it is unfortunately a little too late because Rovian has succumbed to the break and is now on his deathbed and unfortunately passes away. And the only thing that I have to say about that scene was, yes, it was a little bit emotional. But the problem that I had with it was, like, Rovian was so focused on Frey being Tanta Sinta's daughter, and it was basically just like, you know, you will get home, my child, you will get home, you know, I promise you, you'll get home, that he completely ignored Auden, didn't even say, you know, I love you to Auden before he died, was just looked at Frey and was like, protect Athia, and then he died. Those were his last words, and that just kind of made me sad. Like, that was just like, why'd you do that? But anyway, afterwards, Frey is a little bit frustrated. Frey is just a little frustrated at the entire situation, and she's basically just like, you know, Rovian was my last chance of getting out of here, and now I'm going to be stuck here forever without his help. And then Auden comes in, having overheard the situation, and is like, you know, oh, I'm so sorry that my father's death has been an inconvenience to you, you know. And then the two basically have like a very passionate argument where, again, people lean more on the side of Frey as a horrible person. I see both sides of the argument. Auden brings up how Frey is the only person that can help people. She's the only person who can do it because she's the only person who has magic and is the only person capable enough of stopping the Tantas and stopping the break as a whole. And how she's upset that Freya is upset about her father's death when Auden's emotions kind of matter a little bit more in the situation because it's her world being attacked, it's her father who died, and it's just a lot for her to have to deal with. Frey, on the other hand, is basically like, I'm sorry, that's not what I meant, but also, I don't care about Athia. I didn't grow up here. I don't know anything about your people, and you're asking me to do something that I've said repeatedly that I am not comfortable with. You know, you want me to kill people. I don't feel comfortable killing people. You know, you're expecting me to fight a war that I have no part of, and it's just very difficult, and none of you are really hearing me. Is basically what Frey said. There was a lot more harsher language used, but the two of them basically fight, and I personally, what I took away from it was I can see both sides of the argument. And so Frey then is basically like, I'm done, Athia is no longer my problem anymore, I wash my hands of the situation, I want nothing more to do with this place. You know, and Cuff's trying to go like, no, stay, no, stay, no, stay. And, like I said, I don't like Cuff. He's also a hypocrite. You know, he's so pushy about Frey to kill the Tantas, but when it comes to Frey going like, you know, why can't I do whatever I want to do? Cuff's like, do whatever you want. And it's just like, pick one. Gosh, I don't like Cuff. Anyway. Frey ends up having another conversation with this character named Johidi. Johidi is called Frey's fairy godmother or fairy ungodmother or something like that. And she's the archivist in Sepal. And she was very close with Tanta Sila. And she used to work as a blacksmith for Tanta Sila before she became an archivist in Sepal. And Johidi is basically a character that tries to set Frey straight. You know, she doesn't coddle Frey, she doesn't spare Frey's feelings or anything like that. She's very, very stern and very, very blunt with a lot of her wording. And you're introduced to her again early in the game, and you have like various interactions with her as you kill each Tanta. Johini's response to Frey wanting to leave is basically, you want to know what you have here? A library. And this library is filled with books. Books on how you can get home, which you can all read after we're dead, because any answers that you had or any questions that you had that had answers died with Robian, because he was the only person who knew how to get you home. So I'm sorry to say, too bad, so sad, but too bad, so sad. If you want to leave, then bye. Bye. Go on, bye. And that is basically the response. So Frey's at it. She's like, fine, y'all don't want me here? I don't want to be here either. Bye-bye. So she leaves, and then the break basically kind of swarms Frey, and she wakes up in a nicer version of what her life is in New York. She has a nice apartment. She has a nice shoe collection. Auden is her best friend in New York. She has money, she has a job, she has it all figured out, right? And she was going to go meet her mother at this cafe called the Athean. And as she makes her way there, she notices some weird messages along the boards, things that are saying trick and hints to cuff and just all this other stuff. And then it all culminates into Frey realizing that she's under the power of Tanta Olas, who has trapped her into a hallucinogenic realm, right? So Cuff ends up saving her, and you basically do this run through of kind of not necessarily a boss rush, but it's basically kind of a zone thing where it's you go to one part, you defeat the main objective, then you go to another part, and then you defeat the main objective, and that goes and goes and goes and goes until you get to the boss fight. Now, Tanta Olas to me was just very disappointing because she's arguably one of the more powerful Tantas, being able to basically break reality and trap you in a hallucination for forever. And I was really sad when she didn't get a boss fight, because when you finally meet Tanta Olas, you find her dead, and that is when Cuff is revealed to be the main villain, the demon known as Susurrus. And Susurrus is basically a character who is referenced as you progress through the game. You'll do these little dungeons that aren't that long, where basically you just have to fight 2 rooms of enemies and then a boss, and like I said, it doesn't take that long. And you will occasionally find a stone tablet, and those stone tablets will basically tell you, here is basically what happened, and it basically talks about the origins of Susurrus. You will also find these little companion journals along the way from the perspective of a soldier that is called a Redig soldier. And what a Redig soldier was basically, the Redig came from this little patch of land somewhere that isn't too far from Althea. They invaded, and while they were invading, they were basically looking for a weapon to destroy the Tantas, and eventually the Redig were wiped out, and but before they had released the demon known as Susurrus. And so the Tantas, basically trying to save their people, like the good, kind-hearted rulers that they were, fragmented Susurrus's power onto themselves in the form of a cuff. And slowly over time, the demonic energy from the cuff slowly drove them crazy. And that is basically how Frey was introduced to them in their craziest, at the moment of their craziest. But there was a little bit of truth in everything that the Tantas had said, which was, the talking about demons and whatnot. Tanta Prav specifically had called Frey a consort of demons, and they were never talking about Frey whenever the mention of a demon was brought up. They were talking about the thing on Frey's wrist. And it ultimately culminated in, like I said, to the reveal of Susurrus. Suddenly, all of Cuff's manipulation, all of the gaslighty things they said, the hypocrisy, everything that Cuff had said to Frey suddenly made sense. All of the pushiness, all of the bossiness, all of the everything, all of the mental manipulation, all of the gaslighting just made sense because he wanted Frey to kill all of the Tantas so that way he could finally be free. And free to wipe out all of Athia, such was his design. So Frey is now basically just at her weakest. She has lost her magic, she has lost basically everything, and then she is saved. She is saved by a dragon. This dragon you meet early on in the game. Again, it's basically your first boss. And the dragon ends up saving Frey. And that is when we start the last chapter of the game called The Truth. Or rather, like the second to last chapter of the game called The Truth. Where everything that I just told you, you basically learn in quick motion. Like I said, the game encourages exploration, so a lot of what I've explained to you is basically just going to happen, right? Like you're going to find, objects and things like that, notes and stuff, and you're basically just going to be able to read all of that for yourself. But I'm making this video so that way I can kind of explain the story to those who are interested in learning more, and I want, to be able to, tell people, give this game a second chance. So what ends up happening is, Frey then proceeds to meet these spirits of the other Tantas, Tanta Prav, Tanta Sila, and Tanta Olas, who all tell Frey, basically what had happened to them and why they were the way that they were and why things had happened the way it had happened and how they were not angry with Frey. In fact, they were very thankful because Frey had freed their spirits from what had become their prison. And as a result, Frey learns the truth, not only of her birth, but of everything in between. How the Tantas lost their minds, how drastic the change was, and ultimately the beautiful message of Forspoken, which was, you're not alone, even if you think you are. Out there somewhere, there's someone who cares about you. Out there somewhere, there's someone who wants to know that you're safe. Frey started off as this character that was, shipped around from foster home to foster home, told every day in some way, shape, or form that she wasn't loved, that nobody wanted her, that things were never going to change. She felt like she had no potential in life, felt that she was just ultimately nothing and nobody, just a stain on the face of the earth. And through this game, she went on a journey of self-discovery, not only learning that somebody cared about her, but learning that she was loved, she was wanted, she was cared for, even by people who she didn't even know existed. And it all culminates in the end when Frey defeats Susurrus and decides to stay in Athia.
Homer.
And I think that
Sorry,
this game
it's been a while.
genuinely had a
You miss
beautiful
me?
message to
Nah,
it.
I bet you have a
And
full
I
belly and a
think
big old
that
smile
part
on your
of what
face
made
right
it
about now.
beautiful is just the
Been
fact of how
so busy
real it
recently.
was. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
well,
Sure,
you know,
Athia is a
life
fantasy
stuff.
world, and, it's an RPG, and none of these characters are real,
Fighting demons.
but
I'll let you in on a
I
secret.
think that somewhere
I'm
out there,
pretty
there
big
is
deal.
someone who is just
Like,
like
actually,
Frey.
I'm a big
Someone
deal.
who had been
Everybody
spit
would
on
want
their
to.
whole life
Like,
and
I'm
genuinely
not a
felt
big
like
fan
nobody
of the
loved or
whole
cared
hero
about them.
thing, but
Until one day someone
just
had shown
don't
them
judge for
the
taking
tiniest bit of
advice,
kindness, the
okay?
tiniest
I'm
bit of
finally
truth,
using my gifts to help
and
others.
it turned them into
Tell her,
something
thanks
extraordinary.
for the
Something that is
unexpected present.
so beautiful and pure
Kinda wanted to be
that
there to say it myself, but
it just
that's
changed
probably
their
for
lives
another day.
forever. And that's what happened to Frey. Freya's experiences in her life is something that I feel that a lot of people can relate to. It's something that I feel people could really learn from and really just, feel for. You know what I mean? I feel like we all have a little bit of Frey in all of us. I feel like she was a very human character. And even though the voice acting wasn't all that great, and even though the dialogue was a little off at times, I think that the message of the story still stands really, really, really tall and really proud and still rings true for a lot of people. Ultimately, what the message of the game was, you are not alone. No matter what you're going through, you will always be loved and cared for by somebody, even if you've never met that somebody before. And I think that that's something that we all really need right now. So, take it from me, someone who resonated a lot with Freya as a character, give Forspoken a second chance. I feel like it's something that we could all really learn and love. If only just for a minute. If only just for an hour. And I think that ultimately this game is a diamond in the rough. I think that this game should be experienced by people who have the money to spare, and if you really want a heart-wrenching experience, especially near the end, then give Forspoken a second chance.